Welcome, everyone. I'm William Campbell, and today's BUEI Talk is part of Climate Cinema, which is held every weekend in October since 2021. Climate Cinema showcases feature-length climate documentaries and short films on sustainability, conservation, and climate justice. This talk is following the screening of The Secret Science of Sewage, which is a documentary featuring Dr. George McGavern and Dr. Zoe McLaughlin as they investigate how human waste can be revitalized into becoming something renewable and sustainable. The full documentary is available for your viewing on YouTube with the BBC channel, and our panel discussion today following it will focus on the impact of local waste management and the environmental considerations of Bermuda's waste too. We're also going to discuss past perspectives and current approaches on sewage management in Bermuda and take audience questions too. So to introduce our panel today, joining us today are Colin Campbell, the Director and Senior Architect at OBMI Bermuda, and the former Presidents of the Institute of Bermuda Architects and Institute of Chartered Arbiters, Mr. Andrew Dias, the General Manager of WEDCO and the CEO of BLDC, and Mr. Tariq Christopher, the Chief Engineer for the Bermuda Government's Waste Department. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
So, gentlemen, just following from our conversation and our screening of the documentary of sewage, I just wanted to ask if you guys could each comment on what really stood out in the content of the documentary and what really stood out to you in the field's approach around medicine, pea power, poo power, and compost.
If I may lead off, the thing that struck me the most was that for the first time in maybe a couple hundred years in the global view of sewage, we're finding value again in this product. For thousands of years, people use sewage for various elements in their lives through cultivation and then
Colin, could you please repeat that last point? I'm afraid the mic may have cut out for a second.
Sure. The idea that sewage has value is probably the most important takeaway for me through all the various things that they film studied. But this is the first time in a couple hundred years that we've certainly seen the value of sewage for something other than just getting it out of our way and dispensing with it completely.
I'll follow and agree with what Colin is saying. What really stood out to me was the different specific areas where the movie or the documentary talked about how sewage could be resources for power, resource for medicine, resources for soil conditioning. It was very informative. The Bermuda government and WEDCO, as Andrew will speak to probably later on, is following that lead of looking at sewage as a resource place. But the most important or the most interesting part of the documentary was the medical part for me, where they were using the phages to deal with antibiotic resilient bacteria. That was particularly interesting to me.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And as Tarek alluded to, WEDCO and more recently BLDC have both been trying to not just treat waste, but also to utilize and take advantage of the resource that it actually is. And where we look at that is, as far as from the West End, obviously we get quite a bit of waste that comes from the cruise ships, all the restaurants and all the businesses in that area. And we take it, we run it through our treatment plant, which is a tertiary treatment plant, which means it's at the highest level possible. We produce from that a byproduct of water, which we then can reuse for flushing and irrigation. And that has been in existence for roughly about 18 years now. And I would like to see Bermuda start to utilize it. So it's great that, and a perfect timing. And hopefully we can get more people aware of what it is and what can be done with waste.
Further to that, can you guys give us just a little bit more of an overview as to the state of current waste management in Bermuda? I think what is foremost in most of the public's mind when they talk about waste or when they discuss it are only sensational news headlines from the past couple of years about the wash-up of sludge balls on the beach. And that might not be necessarily reflective of how waste management is carried out in Bermuda today. Wondering if
So
you got.
I will start the conversation. So there's several ways in which the country deals with its sewage. So as you mentioned, there are sewage outfalls. There is one dealing with sewage from the Corporation of Hamilton, and then there was sewage outfall in the parish of St. George's, which is being decommissioned currently under the BLDC project. Those were for public sewage collection systems. As people may know, for hundreds of years, residents of Bermuda use cesspits, which are basically soakaways that take the solids and drain the liquid part of the sewage into the groundwater. And then several different institutions and condo associations use primary treatment, which basically involves physical separation of solids and liquids, and secondary treatment, which uses a settlement and biological processes to try to deal with the sewage. As Andrew intimated, WEDCO uses a tertiary treatment system, which is a membrane bioreactor, which removes all the solids from the waste stream and produces an effluent that is almost potable, which means almost drinking water. I know people don't like to think of drinking water from sewage, but definitely possible, and it's being done in Europe and other places. But the systems that WEDCO uses produces effluent, which is very close to potable water, but as he mentioned, they use it to distribute it to areas inside dockyard for irrigation and to provide to institutions and condo associations nearby for flushing water. So these are the different areas or different types and levels of sewage treatment that we have in Bermuda at this time.
Yeah, and just to jump in on that, and also there's another byproduct.
I think what's amusing and interesting to bear in mind, just following Tarek's fine commentary, is that for almost 70 years now, one specific constituency have been using treated sewage water as drinkable potable water. And of course, I speak of the spacemen and space women who've gone into outer space for extended periods of time. And of course, they can't just get rid of the water; it's recycled and done. So we already have the technology to make that work. And so it's just around the corner. And as we see global warming and other effects of inexact rainfall compared to before, we may very, very well find that this technology is going to be more important going forward. Maybe not here in Bermuda, but certainly in other places in the world.
Yeah, agreed. I was just adding in also that the byproducts that can come out of it aren't just the recycled water, but we also have a dewatering press, which basically takes all of the solids, and then you're able to either assist with using it for burning at Tynes Bay, because it is good for that, or eventually, and as other people are doing in different areas of the world, that can then be in turn used for soil assistance for nutrient.
Yep.
On that point, gents, seeing as how these are current practices primarily around WEDCO, is there space, do you feel, for expansion of WEDCO's practices and for integration of the wider Bermuda system with a more practical waste reutilization process?
Well, I'll jump in again first.
Yeah.
So some of the hotels, the larger hotels that we have in Bermuda, are doing similar practices on a smaller scale as WEDCO. And as people may know or heard over the last few years, the Bermuda government has started developing a water and wastewater master plan that is basically looking to take the model that WEDCO has used for, as Andrew said, 18 years, and put it using it on a larger scale. Right now, we're investigating the pluses and minuses of that, economies of scale, and what mix of using the membrane bioreactors or reclaimed water or solids using the solids for reconditioning of soil. We're looking at the best mix and the best value for money. But the Bermuda government is looking at that. They are also looking at removing the second seawater outfalls, so that we will have no incidences where the Bermuda government or any entity on the island is disposing of raw sewage into the ocean. Also, if I may add, the government will encourage and does encourage the public restaurants and hotels to deal with fats, oils, and grease at source, um, so that they can remove it from the waste stream, because fats, oils, and grease, also known as fog, is the villain in sewage treatment. We
Yeah.
can't have it in sewage treatment. So we will be encouraging residences and institutions to deal with their fats, oils, and grease at source in their kitchen, and deal with it in the municipal waste. I'll pass it to Colin.
Yeah. We're certainly seeing in our projects, both residential and other commercial, that the management of sewage has become more and more complicated, and better value, quite frankly. We have been working with a system of just dumping our sewage into cesspits and letting it naturally leach into the soils, but that's no longer good enough. We're seeing, certainly in the last 40 years, we've seen the diminution of wells and the public aquifers, if you will, becoming more and more invested with bacteria, and so that's not good. And there's we basically need to change our whole lifestyle. Fats and oils and stuff, of course, is a choice for our diet, and certainly we could do a better job there. There's also other complex chemistry in cleaning fluids, and of course, some people are not as careful as they should be in just getting rid of waste fuel oils and other toxic materials, paints, thinners, all that sort of good stuff. So by and by, this is a very good initiative for people to take responsibility for their own immediate environment with a longer, bigger scale goal in mind. Yeah, that is really reshaping how we tackle. The other thing, of course, is swimming pools too. Discharge of cleaning swimming pools and all the chlorines and other chemicals that come out of that are no longer able just to be dumped down into a waste pit. Some instances they have to be treated. In other cases, it's a deep borehole. But even with deep boreholes, we're sort of pushing the problem off to somebody else. So personal responsibility is going to come into play here, as well as working with great civic actions like Andrew and Tarek are working on.
Yeah, and just to, I guess the last point on it, to put things in perspective, it is not necessarily something that everyone wants to jump up and address, but if you want to look at it and just put things into context, the South Shore outfall on a regular basis, probably 1 million plus gallons per day, and then when you start adding in St. George's, and then if you think about every single residence in Bermuda, however much water you shower with, do your laundry, use the toilet and flush, all of those gallons are then flushed into a cesspit, which then goes into the ground. If you live in certain areas like Castle Harbor and other where there's caves and whatnot, it gets down to the water source a lot quicker than in other areas. But the point is that we need to really start to think about what it is that we're doing, how we're getting rid of our waste, and how we can all do a better job with it. And I think that's kind of the fundamental point, that we need to start with, not just from a commercial side, but also as a personal side. What can I do differently? And it's the little changes that we make that can make a huge difference at the end of the day.
Agreed.
On that point, gentlemen, of groundwater as well, as we see the impacts of climate change deepening and the potential of rising sea levels also impact our current waste management, our groundwater, and our practice in cesspits, and also maintaining tanks. With more heavy precipitation and rainfall, as we've seen in recent days, recent months in Bermuda, what impact could you possibly foresee this having on our current waste management systems?
I guess I can start again. Climate change, even though some people may wish not to believe in it, it is actually happening. So as you mentioned, with climate change, the rain patterns may change. So in the island, if we could get about 5 inches of rain per month, we wouldn't really need supplementary water or water trucks delivering water to people's homes. But because of climate change, what's happening is we're going to have more rain at certain times of the year, which all may remember. Last week we had torrential rain. It was almost historic. But then you would have longer dry periods. So that's going to affect us. Also, with sea level rise through climate change, what you will have is water coming up onto docks or in areas that it wasn't otherwise before. That will, if we don't change our sewage collection systems, which we are doing, Andrew's Redco and BLDC's project, their sewage upgrades are taking into account resilience. So the materials and the pumping systems they are using will be resilient to climate change and sea level climbing. But also, because of climate change and because the rain patterns are going to change, we're going to have a need for more water. So it makes more sense for us to reuse the sewage water as reclaimed water to take the place of potable water through treatment, because we're going to need more water and we're not going to get it in rain when we need it. We're going to get it in rain when we don't need it. I will pass it on to Colin or Andrew.
Well, I'll give you a funny one on that. For the first 2 years after we launched our treatment plant, because what we do, we have regular testing of our water, and I say regular, it's several times a week. And every time we got our independent test back, we were getting our results saying that it's potable water. So to add on to what Tarek said previously, the quality of water that you can get out of tertiary treatments is quite amazing. And I think that leads into a different question: is what is the right level of treatment for Bermuda in various different sections? And that's probably something that has to be discussed and agreed, and then some sort of legislations put in place so that it is consistent throughout Bermuda, and you don't just put in a grind and pump in a certain area and say, oh yes, I'm treating it, it's going through a pump, when in actual fact the reality is you're not necessarily treating it. All you're doing is changing it into a different form and then pumping it away. Whereas you can then have, your primary, your secondary, your tertiary treatment. And so I'm assuming that the regulators will at some point in the near future have to put certain standards in place for different applications.
As Tarek mentioned, and Andrew as well, climate change is a reality. It's no longer a notion or scaremongering or anything, as people have been saying for far too long. Locally, we're going to have to rethink things. Certainly, lower lying homes close to water lenses and the like will have to have a different means of managing their sewage. There's already sewage management systems that you can get that are you can place in the ground and can give you a secondary and in some cases a tertiary sewage system use. They're used in select campgrounds and other tourist resort areas where they're in natural environments. So technology's out there. It's the willingness and the attention to the climate. The other thing we need to keep in mind too is that as much as we depend on rainwater for potable water, our rainwater just doesn't come from some place right above us. In fact, it's carried on the global winds, and those global winds are also affected by global chemistry and chemicals that have been pushed into the atmosphere as well. So it may very well be that the treated water that comes out of our tertiary systems is going to be much cleaner than the roof water that we capture. Certainly looking around Bermuda today, there's way too many roofs that haven't been cleaned for a little while. So there you go. That the whole business of cleaning a roof every 5 years, cleaning out the tank, all that sort of good stuff. I don't know how many people stick to that religiously, but we may very well find that the product that Andrew is producing is much better for us than what we're capturing on our roofs. Who knew?
If I may just add on to what Colin and Andrew said, so the Bermuda government is looking at modifying the existing regulations to capture exactly what Andrew was talking about, level of service, consistent standards across the board. So Bermuda government is ensuring that is changing so that the island can be more resilient into the future.
Yeah, and it probably would be good to mention that, because the sewage treatment is an expensive process going forward. That also, and Tarek touched on it about what is the economic value and how much is it going to cost and what are we doing. So there has to be a balance in between it. I mean, as Colin said, hundreds of years, pretty much Bermuda has just been more or less disposing, I guess, of sewage. If we have to start to treat it, it's going to be an ongoing cost, not just for the places that are doing it, but who knows? It could get to some sort of level where there is also a cost to the individual homeowner for treatment of it. Likewise, with anything else that we do that's trash, whether or not we have to pay to get rid of trash, whether we pay to get rid of sewage, whether we pay to get rid of any other type of commodity that you don't wish anymore.
And to add on to what Andrew is saying, is exactly right, which is why the documentary film is so important about looking at the resources within sewage. It's going to cost you to do the right thing and the appropriate thing. So you should try to reduce your costs or get revenues to offset it. And as everyone has said, everyone plays a role. Every single one of us, managers, engineers, residents, the kids, the children are our future. They play a big role because they'll keep us honest and make sure that we protect the world for them.
Yeah. It's also about identifying value. And, there's a wonderful comment. There's people who know the price of everything and the value of nothing. Now we're talking about sewage as a value commodity, which is quite a different conversation than what we might have had, a year ago, 2 years ago, or certainly 10 or 15. So now we have a product, a treated water, which is potable, drinkable, and good for you, or safe for you. We currently also can get water supply to our homes through Wellington Waterworks or the government at $22 to $30 per 1,000 gallons. So there's the value quotient right there. So if we can produce a clean water substitute, which is at that price point or less, then all of a sudden we've got a real value set. Also, too, the solids, if they are packaged up into bags or containers, which the hospital does, and they package them and they very euphemistically call them sewage cake. Very odd to know, but there you go. That sewage cake then becomes a mass burn item for the incinerator. Well, you're not throwing that away. You're using that as a substitute for fuel oil or something else, which is coming in at $50 or $100 a barrel for those costs. So again, if we're creating a product that is providing a service less than what we're importing to Bermuda, it has value. And so understanding the value of sewage, which was the takeaway I had from that wonderful film, is part of the whole deal. The incredible medical and other elements is pretty arcane and maybe not part of our viewport at this time, but it's important for us to keep in mind that there's value there too. And there's going to be other things that will come out of it, I'm sure.
Agreed.
Yeah, and I can just add, just on the cost side, the differential that Colin just mentioned between 22 roughly and 30 for treated water or reclaimed water, as we call it, it's in the region of 11 to 13 cents. So if you can imagine, that's kind of half price. So every time you flush, and if you're buying water, then you're saving 50% of the cost of getting potable water via water truck or some other, probably water truck would be more than that, but I'm just using pipe water as an example. So there are savings.
Yeah. So you're a good example of trucked water. I mean, piped water is anywhere from $22 to $25 a gallon. I don't know what 1,000 gallons, I should say. I don't know what the exact numbers today, but certainly your water trucker, he's got his costs on top of that. That's $85 to $90 for the same 1,000 gallons. So that puts at $11 a 1,000 gallons for Wedco water. It's a terrific deal. And so already we should be rethinking value, not cost per se.
Agreed.
And it is in a loop system. I'll say ours is, at least there, where basically everything that you flush, we probably end up treating and taking out somewhere between 5 and 10%. So 90 to 95% of everything that we're flushing, we're then able to reuse. So if you put it in context, it's quite impressive.
Yep. symbiotic.
And just to
circular.
just to speak about that value set and really orienting our look towards waste as a circular economic product and the potential for it. We're speaking a lot about value and about cost savings too. Do you gentlemen think that there is big potential for waste treatment adjustment to our practice in playing a major role in Bermuda's future energy security and in our food security too? These being, of course, major issues which we, of course, as members of the community, feel as a direct impact of climate change and other systemic factors.
So I will jump in again. So the Bermuda government is currently looking at justification or business case of doing just that. So as Andrew has said, they have used this process and this circular system in WEDCO for around 18 years. We're looking at using a mix of this centrally, including Tynes Bay. Now, as people may or may not know, Tynes Bay currently takes waste, municipal waste, treats it, burns it, and makes electricity. Some of that electricity is used currently to make water, significant amounts of water, and it reduces the cost of making that water because energy is a big part of the cost of making water. We're looking at possibly taking that process and adding waste to it. As Andrew said, the process will produce a solid, which can then be burned, which will be feedstock for Tynes Bay to make electricity to then run the water plant and the wastewater plant. So these are the things we're looking at to reduce the costs on Bermudians in the future, to reduce how much waste we put into the environment and our carbon footprint. But we're looking at these things in parallel.
Yeah, I mean, as Tarek has already said, we're already doing it. So it is working and working reasonably well. And I just think that we have to start to all as a community think about what it is, because most people, even with Belco, you turn the lights on, but we don't really pay attention to it until they don't work. Sewage, likewise, you flush the toilet, you expect it to go somewhere. If it doesn't go somewhere, then you have a real problem. And we do need to start to think about this as a community, about what is the best way and how are we being responsible. There is a significant cost to producing it because they have a lot of pumps and other energy, what I call energy hogs. And so what WEDCO ended up doing was putting in one of probably the largest solar arrays in different areas throughout Dockyard in order to reduce our carbon footprint and our electricity bills. So there are ways to make it better than what it is. And again, there's no perfect scenario probably with anything, but it is about striking the right balance, being responsible to the environment for future generations. And that does come with a cost, and whether it's a financial cost or other costs, such as having sewage and high bacteria if we don't do anything, there's a cost to doing nothing as well. So it's really about finding the correct balance.
So, the interesting thing about the film and this discussion is, again, going back to the question of value. For almost 10,000 years, we have a history, a record history of how people dealt with sewage one way or another, both outside their homes or outside their cities, and how it all worked out. I think the important thing is sewage is one of those things. It's not a them and us proposition. It's all about us. We all share the same issue, and if we don't deal with it sensibly, we're going to have really negative impact on our community. We have a system that's worked quite well for 400 years, but that's sort of meeting its point now, and it's time for us to think more boldly and a lot more healthily. And I think what you've heard from both Andrew and Tarek is a really reasonable and sensible way of going forward, working together.
Thank you, gentlemen, and thank you very much for sharing discussion on today's topic of the power and the secret science of sewage. Once again, for everyone watching, I would hope as well that you would engage with the three gentlemen and with BUEI as well in working to ensure that we have waste management practices to the highest standard here. Again, thank you very much, gentlemen, for sharing your time with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having us.
Appreciate being asked.
Have
a good day. Thank you.
Take care.